morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I greet you live from Morrisville, North Carolina, in the 8th largest state in our nation, the United States of America. The 8th largest state, North Carolina, right here in Morrisville. And on this show, we want to welcome you. We talk about global affairs, innovation, turbulence, economically, politically, everything going on in the world, the war in Ukraine, an ever-changing political landscape and environment, not only in the U.S., but around the world. But today, my monologue is based on two special days, one which started early this week, Women's History Month. And first of all, I want to say that we thank and commend every woman out there for their remarkable contributions to our country and to the world. This day in the United States was started in 1987 by an act of Congress. And we want this month to celebrate the women that have done extraordinary things, running companies, serving in Congress, serving in the U.S. Senate. Yes, even the Vice President of the United States with the first female in the office of the Vice Presidency, Kamala Harris. Many world leaders around the world, including Sarah Marin of Finland and others around the world that are running nations and doing really great things. And in the United States, it began with the right to vote, but now we're glad that women are getting politically involved, not only here, but around the world, and also doing many, many other great things. So we want to thank you. On a personal note, I'll say that the smartest women in my life are all around me every day. Some of the smartest people in my life, my mother, my wife, my mother-in-law, my daughter, and all of them I see the tremendous strength that they bring and emotional intelligence. And I think women are naturally born leaders. And so hopefully we can talk about that today and over the course of the month. Now, the second day is a day we're celebrating today, and that is National Employee Appreciation Day. Now, the labor movement guaranteed in our country basic standards for workers, a minimum wage, safe and manageable work standards, an 8-hour workday. And these have been good for American workers, and labor unions continue to fight for those who are not treated right during the workplace. But on this day, I want us to make Employee Appreciation Day about the people that make our organizations run every day, across all industries: healthcare, manufacturing, technology, banking, financial services, and yes, city governments, county governments, state governments, and the federal government. All of these individuals are doing so much every day to not only help us create the bottom line, but to keep our organizations thriving and succeeding. But Employee Appreciation Day, I think, should not just be on one day. It's something we should think about every day in terms of, are we having those relationships with our employees? Are we giving the opportunities, career advancement opportunities in our organizations? Are we providing them opportunities to educate themselves on perhaps upgrading their skills for an ever-changing economy? One where jobs are being automated away, and it might be time to look at how do we upgrade our skills through community colleges and workforce training? And how do we have a conversation about a changing workplace with COVID restrictions are now being lifted? Many of us are used to a hybrid model, and do we want to continue that model to empower our workers to be productive, but give them the flexibility to spend more time with their families? Today, give your employees some time off. Tell them how much you appreciate them. But we want to dedicate this show to some of these other issues I brought up. I want to introduce today Cynthia Watson, who is one of our guests, who's an expert on these issues. And we're going to bring her in to talk a little bit about employee, the workplace, maybe a little bit about Women's History Month and what it means to her. Please welcome Cynthia to the show, and then we're going to go ahead and begin. Cindy Watson, I'm sorry. So Cindy, thank you. Please come on in.
Yeah. Be here.
Sorry. Great. Thank you, Cindy. Welcome. If you could explain to the group your organization and a little bit about what you do in your background and some of your insights you want to share with us today would be appreciated. Let's get started.
Yeah, you bet. I wear a couple of hats, I guess, for the purposes of today's discussion. I'm kind of perfectly suited because I've been a social justice and labor attorney for over 30 years. So my firm was Watson Labor Lawyers, and I've just merged recently with a partner. So we're Watson Palmer Law now. So definitely, I'm very passionate about speaking about issues of employment. I also set up a Epic Workplace Experts, particularly sort of post-COVID. There's been such a profound shift. So we go out and help employers, frankly, do a lot of consulting work about how to attract and retain top employees in this very different culture. But about 5 years ago now, I founded Women on Purpose. I saw that we had come to really define success based on a very sort of more competitive, dare I say, masculine model, and started believing that that was one of the reasons the world was so out of balance, because both men and women started seeing their feminine as a liability. We've all got masculine and feminine qualities. So I just recently wrote a book called The Art of Feminine Negotiation: How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom, trying to elevate people's awareness about how all of life is a negotiation. And let's get more intentional about how we show up in those relationships, maybe coming from a more collaborative model. So that's a little bit about me. So hopefully I can add some insights for your audience.
Okay, just tell me a little about, we'll start with Women's History Month, and, I'm just there's so much we could talk about, but just your perspective of Women's History Month. And I tried in my monologue to sum it up in less than 3 minutes, but so many great game-changing women, from, the right to vote to, females that have run countries, to driving companies like, Indra Nooyi, who ran Pepsi Cola. There's a lot of, women that are doing much better in science and engineering and math, but we still have to do our work there. But tell us a little bit about your perspective of Women's History Month as we then go into Employee Appreciation Day.
Yeah, I loved your monologue, by the way. So I think we're definitely on the same page in terms of our ideology. I think the thing I'd like to speak to most about sort of Women's History Month is recognizing the importance of healing unconscious gender bias and what role that it has. Because, the Me Too movement really launched increased awareness, I think, about overt sexism and gender bias. But the next frontier is really tackling those more insidious and arguably more dangerous unconscious gender biases that still plague our psyches, if you will, and recognizing that, we saw it as recently as with Don Lemon, for example, right? Saying that Haley's not in her prime at 50 years old. Apparently, we've got a really early best before date. Who knew? And so I think people, when they think of unconscious gender bias, always just think about sort of bias by men against women. But in fact, the biases run so deep, we're so deeply conditioned that it's women against women, even women against themselves. And one of the studies that I certainly found the most shocking and, would love to share is young women writing their SAT exams. They've done this variations of this study. And when they were asked to identify their gender in advance of writing the test, half the control group were asked to identify their gender, the other half not. And consistently, in study after study, those young women who were asked to identify their gender, simply check off whether they were male or female, actually performed more poorly time after time. So, it really, I think, causes us, or should cause us, to take a step back and realize the profound impact that these unconscious gender biases have on how women show up. And I think we need to stop the finger pointing and the blame game, and let's all start coming together to recognize that this is something that has to shift. We have to stop seeing feminine traits as a liability. And that applies both for men and women. I mean, you layer on the conditioning bias. They've done similar studies for young boys about men. Here's a man box. Tell us what qualities go in. And young boys still today talk about, toughness, not crying, all of the strong. So we really have to start shifting our perceived
Yes,
gender
absolutely. And over the course of the month, we're going to bring you back on if you want, but we're going to be talking about game-changing women. And I'm going to start a listening tour tomorrow where I do small business as a city councilman, but we're going to talk about kind of women-run companies and kind of like women-owned businesses. So, but I think there's so many women we could celebrate, but we're going to do that this month. Let's talk a little bit about Employee Appreciation Day. So, we want to be, I mentioned city and state and federal employees because there's so much work that goes behind the scenes, but across all industries, the employees are really the lifeline. And I think during a labor shortage, it's getting harder to keep workers because of, people can leave for higher pay, at least in the tech sector that I'm in. But tell us a little bit about like other things that we should be thinking about on this day beyond just what I said about, taking them out to lunch and, doing something nice today. But what should we be thinking long-term about a rewarding workplace, one that's making employees feel valued?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think it's super timely right now because sort of post-COVID, there has been a seismic shift, right? Some people are calling it the Great Resignation. I prefer to call it the Great Reset. I think there's an incredible opportunity here for employers who are willing to be progressive and change the traditional way of doing things, get away from that straight profit-driven where we see employees as cogs in the wheel. I think employers who are really going to succeed and be able to dominate are those employers who are going to come forward and get really intentional, about their hiring practices, avoiding some of those biases we just talked about, whether gender bias, unconscious race bias, get more intentional about your onboarding process, make people feel purpose-driven, excited to be a part of your organization, whatever it is, whether you're making widgets or whether you're, creating the next nuclear fission projects. I mean, make people feel valuable. Get really intentional about resources for your employees. Have wellness programs that you bring in. Get more intentional about flexibility in the workplace. Post-COVID, employees desperately want more flexibility around their hours of work, around some of the assignments that they do, about where they work, frankly, whether they're going to be working virtually or in an office or physical bricks and mortar or somewhere in between, but really promote, I would say in summary, promote a purpose-driven workplace, allow employees to work in their zone of genius at whatever level that means for them. Be intentional about diversity. And, I go in and speak a lot to organizations about burnout avoidance strategies, be thinking about childcare, because I'll tell you, if you're not, you're going to go the way of the dodo bird, because employees post-COVID are really valuing, we used to pay lip service to work-life balance, but now it is top of mind for most employees.
Right. Fantastic. We're going to bring on a panel. I mean, the final thing I'll share with you, I think, rewarding, the workplace, I think is important in terms of the, hybrid models, how you keep them rewarded. Career tracks. I see our town manager doing that well in Morrisville. She's the first female manager, does a really, really great job giving people a track, rewarding their education, different things you can do to keep them satisfied so that they're giving you their best and empowering them to succeed. So we're going to talk about that when we bring on a panel. The final thing I'll say that, and I know if you're men out there, you're going to have a hard time hearing this, but first thing, Kevin O'Leary, I met one of the Sharks a couple of years ago. I introduced him in Cary, and he basically said that most times if he had to pick between a man and a woman run company, he would focus on the women because women manage tasks better because they had to manage raising a family and having careers. And he feels like they're a lot better with time management than a lot of the male entrepreneurs that he invests in, and that they're better and carrying through on their promises, which made a lot of women successful. On a personal note, I've actually noticed in my career that the best managers I've had are actually female managers. What I notice a lot of times about male managers, and right now I have I'm a partner in a firm and I have my own clients. Sometimes the male-run CEOs are very kind of like put myself up on a pedestal, and they're never kind of like swimming in the boat with you. So it's always like, well, you better do this, or we're going to cut the cord, or we're going to do this, or we're going to go to the board and cut your fee or pay or job or whatever, right? Whereas when I've had female managers, what I found them to be more nurturing. So they say, look, my job is to make you successful, giving you that information and that way. And so I've had those experiences, and maybe I'm generalizing, but I see a difference in female managers and their style than a lot of male managers out there. And that's just food for thought.
Yeah, and I love it's interesting because MIT's done some studies recently where they showed that you got higher productivity, more creative outcomes, the more women that there were in the organization. It was interesting across the board because typically I know Google had done a study where it was the diversity, where you have, diversity based on gender, race, all the factor class across the board, that you get much more creativity sparked. And I guess my advice I would just say is, for men and women, because it doesn't necessarily have to be gender-based. Part of the premise of the art of feminine negotiation is let's all start leaning into those so-called feminine traits, like bring collaboration and cooperation and compassion and empathy and curiosity to the table to get those best outcomes.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to bring on a panel. Mark, come on in. We're going to bring everyone in to open it up for our roundtable. We have with us Dan Worthington, one of our political analysts, Lee Newton Rhodes, another analyst.
Good morning.
We've got Nick Paudiva, the founder of IBM and Pot TV, and of course, Mark Lee, the producer of the show, and a radio celebrity as well as a panelist on analyst on Roku TV, Pod TV. But thank you all, gentlemen, for being here.
Glad to be here and everything. Hey, Cindy, I had a quick question for you. Actually, I got several quick questions, but one of them is we do know that there is still, even in the 21st century, a serious pay gap. And I was just wondering what you're seeing in regard to that, and if we're seeing improvements in that, or is there enough improvements? Because I do know that that is one of the things that I'm oftentimes hearing is that in a number of fields, there is a pay gap between what women are paid and men are paid.
Yeah, great question. I love increasing awareness about it. I think we are seeing some shifts, but definitely to go to your question, not nearly enough. And also it's being discriminatorily applied. Like certainly we're starting to see some shifts. You know, women still make less than men. White women make more though than women of color, and both of those make more than women with disabilities, et cetera. So we're seeing this sort of range. And that's got to shift. I mean, in this day and age, and tied to that, the other area where we're really seeing gaps are in access to finance as well. I mean, most of the venture finance that's available out there, venture capital, I think it's like 2% of the capital that is out there is going to women still today. And interestingly, like Forbes was celebrating about the increase. And I'm like, perhaps we want to quell the celebratory fervor around it when these numbers are still so low. So great question.
No, and another thing I was curious about is I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of women bosses, as definitely Steve was referring to as well. And a lot of the spaces that I'm in is in the media. And of course, one of our co-founders who's not here because Nick is here, but Kim Calhoun is a co-founder. But also I've done a lot of work in the arts and the arts fields. And I do know that in the nonprofit world, there seems to be a quicker ability or a quicker acceptance of women bosses and women leaders than there are in some of the other fields. But I'm just wondering if that is an observation that you have noticed as well, and why you think that that may be. Because like I said, whether it was the Durham Arts Council or whether it was the Hayti Heritage Center, which is an African-American cultural arts center, I think, I've had several bosses that have definitely been in the women's space. As a matter of fact, both of those organizations are now run by women and all in that way, whether it's Angela Lee, no relation over at Hayti, or whether over at the Arts Council.
Yeah. A great observation. And I think that goes back to the unconscious gender bias that we were chatting about as well, because it makes sense that in the arts and not-for-profits, that people would see women as being better suited, or at least suited for those roles, because the assumption is, well, women are going to be creative and artistic, and women for the not-for-profits are going to be more compassionate. So it's okay to have women in leadership roles in those kind of limited circumstances. Whereas in business, in politics, we still carry those biases that toughness carries the day, that success is defined based on a competitive model, and that women somehow aren't equipped for that. And again, it's when we're ascribing qualities based on gender rather than recognizing that we all have masculine and feminine energy and those leadership qualities. And I think we shifted that in COVID for the first time. So I'll be interested to see how this plays out, because a lot of people were saying that countries who had female leaders actually fared better during COVID. And we don't have to get in the muck of whether that's true or not. But at the very least, I think the value of feminine stock for leadership, more traditional leadership in the business world and the political world, are being recognized. So let's hope we start to see that play out. But I think it'll take some time.
One last question, then I'm going to open it up to the other folks as well, because I'm sure they've got all kinds of questions. But sometimes on our show, we have talked about the importance of role models. Sometimes people get on my case, including one that's not here right now and everything. But how important do you think it is to have those kind of role model spaces at, whether it's on a women's side or an African-American side or a number of other sides? Because I do know that we have had some guests that have prided themselves on the general nature of who they are, whether that's American or whether that's whatever, versus their gender or their ethnicity, and all in that space. But I can say that as a Durhamite, meaning Durham, North Carolina, I am very proud to say that we have our first African-American women elected mayor. We also had another woman that was mayor sometimes back and everything, but Elaine O'Neill is the mayor here in Durham and seems to be doing a very effective job tackling some very tough issues, including issues around gun violence and around gangs and around housing and a number of other issues as well. But I just wanted your take on the importance of these kind of role models, whether it's on gender orientation or ethnic side.
Yeah, I think again, love the insight on it. And I think it is absolutely critical to have those role models. If you see it, you can be it. And, we're
Oh,
starting to
God.
see an increase. Like Gina Davis, I don't know if you've seen the work that she's done on the media. You'd mentioned the media, and it was shocking the lack of representation for women and for persons of color, frankly. And everything was dominated, not only for speaking roles, but even extras. The ratio was like 10-1 in both of those categories. And also, I think with Black Lives Matter, we're seeing a much more increased awareness. We're starting to see more movies and TV shows where we have role models, and also even just visibility, frankly. I mean, for a long time, we didn't even have visibility, let alone have people in leadership positions with role models. So I think it's critical for that younger generation come to be able to see those models and aspire to it and recognize that it is possible.
Yes,
I know I said that was
absolutely.
the last question, but I do have
We're
one
going
more.
to
That's
open it
not
up. We
about
also have
women.
Sasha Starr from Ukraine. The last 30 minutes, we're going to have him talk about Ukraine, and we talk about
Oh,
other
yes.
stuff. But any other? Let's continue our discussion here, guys.
Yeah, definitely. And the question I had, it wasn't about so much women, but you kind of alluded to it. And I know me and Steve have talked about it, but where do you see the great reset going and everything? Because I know a lot of people are doing remote work, and a lot of my job, not just here on Pod TV, but also I work for a testing company, is very much remotely based. And I don't think that they're rushing to get us back to the office. And
Yeah.
I've heard some people that are talking about 4-day weeks. There are some companies that are trying to get their employees back to the office, the traditional office, and getting some pushback. And I also know that even from a economic standpoint, there are some people that are concerned that we may have empty buildings sitting out there, even though there are some people that have some innovative solutions, including solutions around housing for those empty buildings. But I was just wondering your take on where the workforce is going to be going, say, in the next 5 to 10 years as we get further and further out of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, and I think people assume this is just a temporary sort of glitch and things will go back to normal. And by that, they mean the old norm. And I don't think that's the case. I think 100 years from now, we're going to look back and see this as one of those major shifts, economic shifts, kind of like the introduction of agriculture, right? As opposed to sort of farm-based. I think people are leaving traditional work models in droves. And I don't think we're going to see the comeback to the bricks and mortar kind of businesses. I mean, there's been such a profound move to be doing things online. A lot of people have left traditional businesses to start online businesses. And I think employers have to start recognizing in that great reset as well. If they want to attract and retain top talent, they're going to need to change the way that they do business. And just quickly on the 4-day work week, the one caution that I would throw out there, I think, yes, we want to be allowing people more access to lifestyle, but not at the cost of, like, typically if people reduce to a 4-day work week, are going to be deemed likely part-time employees and be losing benefits and access to the kind of security. So we don't want to have the lowest common denominator become the new norm going forward in terms of income, cost of living, and quality of life for people. So we got to find that balance somehow if we're going to make this work and move forward rather than backward.
Yeah,
I'm going to turn it over to others right now. But Sasha, by the way, Miss Watson is a fellow Canadian as of now because she is from the Toronto area. So I just want to let you know that I did invite a fellow Canadian to come and give us some insights as well. So just wanted to let you know that and open it up to other questions that folks may have.
I have a question. If I can go first. First of all, thank you for coming. You said something interesting before about women when they're asked to check the box for gender. Martin Luther King said we should, go to a meritocracy as opposed to looking at people on a racial lens. Maybe it's time to stop looking on a gender lens and just make gender irrelevant and just judge people for what they are and get rid of this male, female, whatever. Am I wrong on that?
No, I love that insight. And I actually think we're moving that way. And I really agonize myself with my book, whether to call it The Art of Feminine Negotiation, because that seemed to be doubling down. And I'm constantly having to explain this isn't gender-based. We all have masculine and feminine energy.
Right.
But right now, I think people ascribe certain traits as being either masculine, feminine, or neutral. And there was a huge study of 60,000 people, the Athena Doctrine, where and it was incredible, the consistency. But I think we are in a massive shift right now where we're moving away from gender identities altogether. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, geez.
Take care of much of the unconscious gender biases that we're seeing. I'm hearing some pushback.
Okay, I've had enough. Enough BS. Okay?
Out of the cage.
Listen. I appreciate everything you said, but let's get real. The work environment is highly competitive. It doesn't. it doesn't really matter where you're a man and woman. It's going to be highly competitive. I'm a lawyer also. I mean, I understand all the situations that you're talking about, and I appreciate them. My violin plays so much on all the agendas you're trying to promote, but it's not real. We can't afford to pay for the system we've got, let alone letting all these lazy employees work 3 or 4 jobs at home because they're gaming the system, because that's what's happening right now. And and so, well, the employers aren't loyal to us, so we don't need to be loyal to them. And I get teary-eyed, and I'm also, I'm over 65 now, and so I have a way to look back at all this junk, right? Men and women are different, and it's a good thing they are, right? And men and women have different strengths. It doesn't mean that a woman or man can be more effective in any particular role. It depends on the type of role and the type of relationship and culture of the company. And yes, I see a cultural shift, and that's good, right? But it isn't good to wussify and to demonize the men of the world. Because
okay, let me address that. I totally agree with you.
Wait a second, I'm not done.
Fair enough.
Our boys are being marginalized. They're not performing as well as they used to. It's all because of this feministic bullshit that's been shoved down their throats to make them seem like they're less than they are. And that is dangerous to our society, because whether you believe it or not, the armed forces are predominantly male. They have to defend our country. They have to be brave. They have to be true. They have to be strong. They're not all a bunch of wussy bisexual or transsexual people. That does not work in the real world. And so you guys are socialists and left-wing nuts, not that you are, but the people who are really destroying
He means it in a good way.
Society and our culture, because
Out of love.
strangling our social construct to the point where we can't be productive, we can't be positive, we can't continue forward with values that help propel us into a better way. It's just wrong. And so you go ahead. I've had my spill.
How do you really feel?
I love it. I think we need to have the dialogue. So this is great. And a couple of things may surprise you. I agree with you on, and I'll speak to that in a second. But I think one of the things I'm glad you mentioned about a violin, let you play the violin, because in fact, the symphony studies are sort of the proof is in the pudding, frankly, when we talk about, oh, geez, this bullshit about gender bias, certainly with symphonies where they were being judged, based on supposedly absolutely objective criteria. It was only when they went to blind auditions that they finally started having dramatically more women get into symphonies. So we really can't dispute the fact that these unconscious gender biases exist and that they run deep. They've done studies where they give people identical resumes, the only change being one has a man's name and one has a woman. And in overwhelming numbers, candidates, both men and women, choose the male for the job. Now, when you talk about the fact, though, that you use language like wussy when you're describing things that are ascribed to women, is in fact part of the problem. But the one thing
I'm not describing.
Okay, hold on. Now it's my turn. One of the things I
men
totally agree with you on is about when you said the men in our society. I absolutely agree. When we talk about unconscious gender bias, that runs both ways. And if I didn't point that out, certainly men are also conditioned to believe that they have to be tough, that they have to be the provider, the protector, etc.
We do.
And that is dangerous as well.
No, it's true.
No, well, actually, it's not the case. And again, the proof is in the pudding. We have a lot of primary income earners in the family. You mentioned the Army. Some of the most heroic things that have been done by women or people who fall elsewhere on the gender spectrum. You talk about left-wing crazy socialists, but there's a spectrum at any point.
I don't agree with you.
It's about having dialogue, meaningful, respectful dialogue, as I'm trying to do here, which is recognizing where there's value in the points that you make. Just dismissing them outright does a disservice, I think, to everybody.
Well,
and it's one of the reasons why it
does a disservice to the dialogue too. I mean, there is a tension here. You're all one side of it. And
not at all.
You're the cheerleader. And you need cheerleaders on that side, but there's a balance in the world, right? And it depends on the culture too, right?
The balance is the whole premise of the art of feminine negotiation. It's not gender based. It's that maybe the time has come for both men and women to stop being so afraid of leaning into those feminine skills. How is empathy considered only a
No, it's a
female
good thing,
trait?
right? But that's not necessarily only a female trait.
That's my point.
That's my point.
Precisely my
I
point.
mean, I like win-win negotiations because getting to yes is what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think we're actually disagreeing. I think that the language you're using is different. I think that is precisely the point. Both men and women have to stop seeing so-called feminine as a liability, which goes back to the point that was made is let's stop ascribing gender to them at all. And you got very offended by that, but
well,
I think that
you get to the point where if you start supporting the trans movement,
Dan, this has nothing to do with trans. This is looking at people for being people. Period.
No,
we
she
need to
made
have-
the comment. She started talking about people who are intersexed and that kind of thing.
That's a separate conversation.
That is a separate conversation, but she's trying to make it a part of this conversation.
No, you raised trans. I had said nothing about
Yeah, she
sexual
did. I
orientation.
gotta
or
defend
gender.
Cindy here. I mean, I think she's been talking about bringing in a perspective of both. You know,
Right.
she's-
Well, because I believe that the trans movement is actually hurting women. It's hurting
That
women.
could be, but that wasn't on the table this
It
morning.
wasn't on the table at
We're
that
not talking
particular
about
time.
that.
Hey,
We're talking
Cindy,
about
just
women.
really quickly.
Sasha
hold on a
Starr's
second.
been quiet.
Hold on a
Sasha,
second.
any
Dan,
points you want to
Dan.
make on this?
No, I had a question really quickly for Cindy and everything. And exactly to Dan's point and everything, but how important do you think it is? And I'm not saying that we need to have a all-women army, even though Women King was a good movie and everything, but how important do you think it is
It would
to
make
have
a good movie.
A little plug there.
and some
Like
roles
blood
that are
wrestling, right?
opposite of the stereotypical roles and everything, whether that's on more men in nursing or whether that's more women in engineering, which can be seen as a male-dominated field and everything. So, how important do you think it is to have some shifts in some of the stereotypical jobs at all in that way?
Yeah, I love it personally. I think it's those kind of shifts that we're seeing are going to break the myths. I mean, when we keep buying into old rhetoric and old patterns, we're never going to bust through the myths that cause the kind of conditioning that doesn't serve and male, female, or any of the spaces in between, frankly, right? So I absolutely think it's important. And it's interesting you mentioned the movie because don't forget, I mean, historically, we saw like in the Amazon, I mean, some of the fiercest warriors were women, like, sort of pre our current societal expectations. So I think it's really important that we recognize that.
They got wiped out on Wonder Woman, if you remember, right? They got wiped out. Okay.
Right.
Let's make that clear. No. Hey, listen, that's Cindy. I think that it's good that people who are talented, no matter what gender, can be successful and that they can fill the full measure of their creation. I do believe that you shouldn't undermine or discount the role of women who choose to stay home and raise children and families.
Agreed.
Because that's very strongly needed in our country because it raises strong children with strong values and work ethics that help build our country, right? So, the problem with all of the stuff is if we need to honor all women, whether they're in the home, whether they're in the workplace, women are a joy. They're a gift. They're bestowed by God with different characteristics that are wonderful than we guys have, right? Because we're just different. And that's a good thing.
It's like that notion of women are, because actually I had a guest on one of our other shows that brought up the book, and it's a very famous book that is men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and all into that. So there are really different ways that folks are raised and thought to be in different spaces. But there are also, as Cindy was saying, some stereotypes, and I'm actually going to bring up one today. Might get myself in trouble with some of you conservatives, but there is a running theory out there that the welfare lines and the welfare roles are filled with African-American women and all in that. But studies, and I think Cindy can back me up on this, have showed that the number one recipients of welfare are actually white women, if I remember correctly, and all in that space. So
because there are more of them, right?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know the stats on that, but I love the point you're making. And also, just going back to, yes, we should respect women who want to stay home and make that decision. And we also need to, the missing piece, though, I think, is that we also need to respect men who decide to stay home. Or
Oh no, I don't buy
people
that. I don't buy
choose
that. Get
based
off
on
the bed,
based
Bob.
on what, if I
Share
may
the
ask? So what is the problem with the
responsibility,
man
right?
who chooses to? Is I thought America is all about free choice and democracy. Isn't that
Yeah.
They can
everything
do what
we
they
fought
want,
for?
but
It's
it's just not something I strive to, right? Because I see the male's responsibility as the primary breadwinner in the home. Now I realize that sometimes the woman is more skilled and can earn more and capable, right? And the guy's kind of dumber and can't do as much. And
Or he has a home-based business, Dan.
huh?
or
Well, I
he
mean-
Or he has a
genuinely
home-based
feels
business.
passionate.
Well,
It just
yeah,
works for
there's
the
a home
family.
base. I mean, I work out of my home, right? I have,
But
I have
Dan, what do you say to the women? And there are some women out there, and I'm gonna bring it up because I've got some friends that are in this space that are very fluent, very successful, and they actually feel that they are stereotyped in their roles as being overtly assertive, overtly aggressive. Sometimes there are even words that are used that are not nice words for those
Oh yeah,
people.
Hillary
And
Clinton
sometimes
was
they
described
have
me
to
as-
even
yes, I know.
wind up going to a different pool. And I'm not knocking blue collar workers. We're talking about Employee Appreciation Week as well. But sometimes they go to a different pool because they feel that they are not respected as women leaders, even in the, because the book deals with both the boardroom and the bedroom, if I remember, Cindy, and everything. And definitely there are some very successful women that I know that have had some hard times in the dating space as single women because of their being in the corporate America lanes. But Cindy, I just wanted your take on that because, like I said, I've got some friends around the
Yeah.
country that have actually
And
dealt
I'm
with it.
happy to share. And thanks for raising that, actually, because I mean, I was guilty of that, to be quite frank. My clients called me the Barracuda for many years, and they meant it as the highest compliment, of course.
I can see how that would be, Cindy.
But the
Dana, what do they call
interesting
you?
thing is, let me just very quickly, because I had taken a negotiation course in law school where we were basically negotiating for our marks. And I didn't realize it at the time, but from then I was negotiating pre-law, the practice of law, getting in the business world. I was bringing that so-called feminine energy. It was all about rapport build. You know, what do you need? What can I do for you? What can you get? And I won every negotiation that year because of that, without realizing it. Then I started the practice of law and looked around, and I'm like, I better get scrappier if I'm going to get taken seriously. And I think that goes exactly to the point you were making, that women show up. And so it's a double whammy, because partly we show up differently, believing that's the only way to succeed. And even when we act in the same way that our male counterparts are,
Yeah.
we get characterized as being angry and bitchy and controlling. And in fact, they've done a study of a boardroom
Not
table.
fair.
They take a picture where in one, all the same people, but in one picture, it's a man sitting at the head of the boardroom table. In another, it's a woman sitting at the boardroom table. And they ask participants to describe the person sitting at the head of the boardroom table. 3 guesses what happens. The man gets described by both men and women as being a leader, charismatic, strong, based on the photo. And the woman in the same photo, when she sits at the head of the table, is described as bossy, controlling, inappropriate. So clearly a lot of bias that women in positions have to overcome. Some of it's
Got a
internal,
question.
some of it's external.
What was it? Was it true?
Yeah, I was 100%. I was guilty of being a barracuda for
Well, no,
years.
yeah, because you know, sometimes women think they have to be that way because of their male counterparts.
Yeah.
When it doesn't serve themselves or anyone else, right?
But interesting point, because I was, yes, I acknowledge I was being a barracuda, but no more so than the male lawyers I was dealing with. But they
Yeah.
didn't get those monikers.
Hey, Cindy, and then I do want to get to Sasha and what's going on in definitely in Ukraine and everything. And I know we got his show coming up at 11 as well. But me and Lee have had some interesting conversations around the racism aspect of things. And there is such a thing as covert racism and overt racism and all in that space. So is that something that we're also seeing in the gender bias? Because one of the things, and I'm not going to try to speak out of school, and Lee can correct me if I'm wrong, but he's actually asked me about whether when I brought up redlining and things that are going on in housing, he has asked me if that is an official policy. And I would say it's not an official policy, but it can be like a overt policy that is out there and that is not necessarily written in rules and all of that space, that is like a written rule that you are supposed to do it that way, but it is done because it is an unwritten rule, for lack of a better term. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and if that is something that also exists in the gender bias space as well.
Yeah, and I think on Tula, I'd actually go further. I think, I talk a lot about unconscious gender bias, where race is definitely an issue because, as I say, that disparity is even higher for women of color. But it even beyond sort of just unconscious gender bias, I think we have a lot of unconscious racial bias that is playing out every day in a myriad of ways. And we're raising awareness. It's the overt bias, at least you can deal with it. It's those unconscious biases that I think in some ways are actually more dangerous because they're insidious and they undercut sort of the fabric of all of the decisions that we make without people being raised. So I love that you guys love the show, love that you guys are having these kind of discussions, because that, I believe, is where the future is going to shift. We're seeing such a polarization today globally, frankly. We need to be having these discussions.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the term unconscious bias. Can you define that for me? And how do you deal with something if it's unconscious?
Yeah, no,
Well,
great.
when you get drunk and you can't think, right? And then you're unconscious.
Yeah.
Bias,
If only
no
it were
matter-
so simple. The unconscious bias is, they refer to that when it talks, like when we're, some people would recognize that they have, strong feelings against women or strong feelings against people based on their race. And they make statements that are blatantly sexist or racist. That's the kind of overt discrimination that you see.
That's conscious. Right.
And that's conscious. The
We're called
unconscious
redneck.
arises from when we have
Redneck.
deep-seated conditioning. And we've had generational conditioning, both on issues of race and gender, for so long that it's those unconscious biases that would cause a young woman to perform more poorly when she checks off. It's not like she's saying, oh, they made me say I'm a woman, I better go in and underperform. She's not even aware that she's underperforming. They're not even aware we're making decisions showing up differently. And that's why it's so insidious. And to answer your question, how do we shift it? It's by having discussions like this. Let's just start raising awareness. So let's start not just digging into our old position, but let's be open to listening to alternative positions, seeking to truly understand the needs of other people, the positions of other people, so we can start having the dialogues and shift away from these unconscious biases, get them up to the surface, and then we can deal with them and people can choose, oh, I don't like that about myself, let me brush that away, or not, but at least it's overt and it's easier to deal with. I don't know if that's
Lee, along those same lines, a conversation that I've seen several people having in different ethnic groups is a notion, and I think that it is one of those conscious and unconscious biases, is around generational wealth. You've heard a lot of people talking about generational wealth in different communities.
I can't relate to that, Mark. Sorry. Got the wrong family here.
No,
No,
not
but,
me.
that was my point, is that in some generational wealth, it's almost like it's ingrained into society to pass on the money and to pass on the success onto the next generation. And some societies, it is more ingrained than others, because it was definitely a thing.
Why would you not want to do that as a parent?
In Wall Streets and all in that, if you look at the historical Black Wall Streets, but then they were destroyed, and there was a less of a push to have that happen. And now that is being reversed, where more and more people are looking at trying to make sure that they are leaving something for their descendants, whatever that may be. I don't have any kids, but I do hope to at some point. If Nick lets me run this whole,
Mark, do you need my address?
I can pass this over to my nephew and everything. But we got to get past Nick's family first, because they are the owners, not me.
We're the trust babies, right? I mean, they had them. I mean, I'm kidding. No, I'm not.
Well, I mean, we're gonna keep going today. A couple of things. Sasha, maybe a quick update from Ukraine by you. Alex Murdaugh found guilty of murder. That's the big news of the day.
I don't think anyone's shocked with that.
I don't know what happened there, but
But did he do it? That's what I want to know.
I'm going to give you more news. Real quick.
I wasn't there.
More schools are
wasn't there
dropping
either.
SAT and ACT requirements, and police could not be allowed to sue former President Trump over January 6th. 12 officers and several Democratic House members want to hold Trump liable for physical and psychological.
Now, let me see. So you're saying a Democrat decided that Trump could be sued by
I don't know. It just says police officers. And finally,
So
the
the
Ohio
Democratic
train
Attorney
derailment.
General decided that. Boy, I am surprised.
Ohio train derailment is going to be tested for pollutants. So that's the other big issue of the day. Let's finish off with Cindy today. We can come back in the last few minutes to talk about some of these issues. But
I have one comment.
Sure.
about
Yes, Sasha, please.
Cindy, first of all, my pleasure to have you on the program. And
Thank you.
I would like to give you one very interesting example of which very few people are aware of. I don't know if you are following chess or chess in Canada, for example. Probably not. But my wife, Navastar, happened to be 8 times Canadian chess champion and
Wow.
represented Canada internationally many times. And actually, I remember many years ago, she was a bronze medal winner on the first board, representing
Wow.
Canada in the World Olympiad. So when she came back home, she was asked by Canadian Chess Federation to publish an article for their magazine. And so she asked, what theme would you recommend? And at that time, Nava would outplay probably 99.9999% of all Canadian players, including men and females and transgenders and just name it. So, you know what was the article theme that she was given to? She would have to describe why men are better chess players than women. Can you imagine?
Oh wow, man! How condescending
Incredible.
is that?
Incredible.
It's incredible. Absolutely agree with you.
Douchebag.
But I had to help her to really dig into the subject and find out why. And we went into studies by one of the leading university, Hopkins University in the United States, where they had studies on that subject. And at that time, it was many years ago, the studies showed that most likely the reason is that women's two brain hemispheres are wired somewhat differently than men's, and therefore in certain areas, women are actually stronger and better
Yep.
with than men, but yet some other areas when chess fits into that area because it's close to
Analytical?
Laura Limbic, yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's been proven beyond any reasonable doubts. I doubted that, especially now the females are getting stronger and stronger in chess. By the way, they're winning now tournaments. They're competing on equal terms. The only thing is that if you will take 100 players, there will be probably 95 male players and only 5% female players. And that's the reason also very interesting that in elementary school, it's about 50-50. But then when they're moving to juniors and high school and so on, then females for some reason are dropping from chess. And somebody commented that they have much better and viable interests than chess. And that's why they're...
they get a life. Yeah, they have a life.
Yeah,
Have a life.
Right. And a lot of men are to just keep playing chess. And what's surprisingly is that most of them are very lousy players, but they just keep playing and playing and playing. Now, on the highest, on international stage, you will see that male, they are respecting each other. When they're playing of two male of similar strength, you would anticipate that there will be a draw, and rather very quickly. In females tournaments, there are almost no draws. Even in the drawish positions, they are playing until one will win. They have absolutely great fighting spirit, which male don't have.
Yeah, interesting.
Surprising.
Well, I love a couple of things I comment for. Thanks for sharing that. I love that story. That's in the article they asked her to read. I was going to say it's incredible, but it's actually not surprising, which is a sad commentary. But two things. One, in terms of the brain chemistry, there definitely are differences. The intra and inter hemispheres. So women tend to be able to go across both hemispheres of the brain more frequently, and it's a brain structure issue, whereas men tend to be more intra within each hemisphere of the brain. You're either in that right or that left hemisphere of the brain. So there may well be some connection with chess. I'm a terrible chess player. My Queen's Gambit is the closest I come to knowing about chess. But I think it's a combination, actually, Sasha, where you've got that intra versus inter. But a lot of it, I do believe, goes back to that conditioning, because I talked about that SAT study, and one other study they did is on the choices that women make, and in STEM, that science, technology, engineering, and math, which would explain some of that kind of chess thinking and your concept, your point about the elementary versus later women dropping out. They did studies where they asked women whether they would prefer the arts versus STEM, so that is sort of more traditionally feminine versus what's considered masculine. And unbeknownst to the participants, half the control group were being flashed subliminal images that would be considered feminine, the color pink, lipstick, Barbies, whatever. And the other half were flash neutral. And the ones who had the neutral subliminal messaging picked the STEM in much larger numbers than women who were flash subliminal feminine messages. They picked arts in overwhelming numbers. So it appears the choices we make are also affected by this deep conditioning about bias. So I love the chess story on so many levels. So thanks for sharing that.
Hey, Cindy, just really quickly, there has been some women's sports organizations that have done quite well. We know that the WNBA is doing quite well, and all in that space, not nearly as well as the NBA. But there have also been some pushes to have, to one of Dan's point, women in what would be considered traditional male sports. I know that there are at least a few women that are playing football that might be as kickers or a number of other kind of smaller positions. And I think there have even been some women that have tried out and made it on hockey teams. But I was just wondering your thoughts around some of this shift in sports lanes and all in that space.
Why would you want to play hockey?
Yeah, because why would men want to play hockey? That's
I know
that's
it's stupid. It's
point,
sort of like
right?
sort of like joining the Marines. Why?
No, but I mean, it's the answer is the same for both. So I love your question, and yes, I think it goes back to the question you'd asked me about the shifts in the career choices. I mean, playing professional sports, or even at the level in high school. I mean, that we're seeing that.
Cindy?
There, I think it's healthy.
Yeah, I understand why women would want to play hockey, but the question is, why would women want to play hockey with men who are so much bigger, faster, and stronger? That I don't get.
Yeah, you get hurt.
It's very dangerous.
No,
yeah, it is very dangerous.
And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, frankly. Although, interestingly,
No pun intended.
We are seeing a lot of young girls playing in co-ed leagues, and surprising, because I'll be honest, and it shows my own bias. I thought the same thing you just said, like, oh my gosh, they're going to get killed out there.
We're also seeing a lot of young girls getting severely injured when you bring men competing with women in like boxing and MMA and sports like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, some are holding their own, but I think there's no question there are sophisticated
Very few.
And
Very
I
few.
agree.
Yeah.
And to me, the bigger issue is about the compensation. And Don Lemon, who's got himself in trouble again, if you recall, he was the one who had commented
And they're
about
still
watching
paying him,
female
right?
sports is not.
But there's a reason for that difference.
So,
There's a reason difference in compensation. It's based on advertising. Where are the eyeballs? Who's paying for this?
Right.
yeah. Although, doesn't that go back to the conditioning, right? If we made it more
Corruption.
interesting, and we didn't see it as being the conditioning is that it's less interesting. In the same way that women will read books written by both male or female authors, men are significantly less likely to read a book written by a woman. So again, how
Really?
much of
That's
this is
interesting.
unconscious biasing? Who knows?
No,
We'll see.
and speaking of conditioning and bias, and then we got to go to
Harry
Steve's
Potter
topic,
was one of the
everything-
most famous series. Going with the Wind. These are all women writers. Why would someone care about that? Maybe I missed I don't know.
care.
I didn't get the
I don't know,
memo.
but one of the things that I've been finding lately, and that is surprising, I don't know how it is in Canada, but there were certain products that you could not advertise, whether that was cigarettes, and definitely there's not. We still got beer ads. but
Alcohol.
I've seen a lot of things that are women-oriented products, including some contraception kind of products that are advertised in the middle of the day. I was actually watching one yesterday, and that actually surprised me. So I don't know if Cindy's got any thoughts around that, but that actually surprised me when I was looking at that, and that is definitely something that we are seeing.
Before Cindy answers, Mark, you should know they put those products in male bathrooms now. So there's not necessarily women products.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
That's because some men go, never mind, I won't explain.
Menstruate.
There we go. Well,
I hadn't noticed that trend, but I will pay attention.
we got a few more minutes, but we really want to thank Cindy for being with us today. Hopefully you can come back. We want to bring in more female perspectives, both as analysts and some of these issues that we talk about. I think, we want to continue to have these discussions. And as we continue Women's History Month, any ideas, Cindy, that you have of other women that we can interview and talk to would be wonderful. I'm going to begin my small business tour tomorrow, where I'm going to go out to women-owned businesses and talk to them around the area in North Carolina. But, thank you for being with us today. Any final insights? We're going to close out in a few minutes and come back on Monday to talk about some of the things I talked about, particularly the Murdaugh trial and other things going on politically. Presidential candidate Ramaswamy another Indian American, along with Nikki Haley, and the presidential, more and more people talking about the presidential race, and all eyes on North Carolina and who will be our next governor. Will it be Attorney General Josh Stein or Trump-backed Mark Robinson, lieutenant governor? Never held a political office and made one speech on guns and went from working on a manufacturing assembly line to being lieutenant governor of North Carolina. So,
and maybe he'll be governor as well. Hey, Cindy, just really quickly to get back to the employee things, and then we'll go to Steve's closeout. Are we seeing that continued trend of companies that are in the physical companies doing the efforts to have that work-life balance, whether that's childcare on site, whether that's exercise programs on site, or some of those other things to make sure that people are having that work-life balance? And I am a big fan of the work-life balance, but are we seeing enough corporations doing that work? Because I know that was a trend before the pandemic, but I don't know if it's still a trend as much now.
Yeah, great question. I think the employers that are not doing that, who have not made that shift, are struggling to survive right now. I think that the ones who are really getting intentional about bringing in wellness and flexibility and all of those factors are not only surviving, but they're thriving. So I do see that as the wave of the future. And I hope that trend continues and that we remember some of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic and the reaction to the pandemic.
No, I appreciate it. Steve, you ready to toss it over to you? We got about the 57-minute mark.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being with us today. My closeout is on an amazing event that I attended. First of all, I want to wish everyone a happy Employee Appreciation Day and a Women's History Month. Next Tuesday, I think Wednesday, is International Women's Day, so we're going to talk about that. And but I attended an event hosted by Wake Tech Community College, and it was called Ignite, and it was a celebration and a fundraiser for our community college here. And the theme was the fact that you're running a race in the game of life, and that how many people who are unable to go to college can actually go through the community college system and get really, really great jobs. The president, Scott Rawls, actually made a statement. Wake County runs on Wake Tech, and the theme was track and playing Rocky music and kind of having these individuals that had gone through challenging times, but were able to stay on track through their community college, and very inspiring stories. Olympic medalist Randolph Ross actually came and delivered some remarks, and everybody got a medal at the end of the conference, just as a good token of appreciation for all those that fund the community college. But it really got me thinking about the role of community colleges in our educational system, and what it's going to mean in terms of retraining and reskilling our workforce. So hopefully we can bring in Scott Rawls, the president of Wake Tech, to talk about that in a few weeks. But it was a very interesting conversation, and one that was very emotional when you heard some of these personal stories from folks that had gone through challenging times, but then are holding a community college degree. And many of them are going on to UNC, NC State, and other colleges around the country. So we could talk about that as education continues to get more expensive, and we talk about student debt relief and all the things going on with the Supreme Court. Where does the community college system in the U.S., what role does it play, and will it become part of more mainstream to give folks the ability to reinvent themselves, even late in their careers, to get back into that workforce with skills that are in demand? So that's going to be one of the things we're going to talk about next month. But thank you all so much for being with us. Be safe wherever you are, and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll be talking to you all very soon. It's been a pleasure having Cindy Watson on the show as our main guest.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Cindy. And hopefully, as several of the folks said, we hope that you will make a return appearance as well, because definitely we enjoyed the comment, a little bit of tit and tat between you and Dan, but you still held your own. And he's actually a dean, or a former dean, at one of those schools over there in the western side of the East Coast, and all in that space over there around you.
Back Central, actually.
Okay, nice. Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Happy to come back.
Yeah.
Thank you,
folks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Mark, send me that live link. I didn't get it today.
All right, I'll do that.
Email it to me.
Yep.